The first night in the new house smelled like fresh paint and clean wood. Rain threaded the narrow Tokyo street, beating on the double-glazed panes that didn't shiver when trains passed. He had wanted that, the silence, and the safety of a tight, insulated shell. He listened to the low hum of the heat recovery fan and told his wife they had built a place that would never fail their children. By morning, their daughter had a nosebleed that spattered her pillowcase bright red. They blamed the move. New school, boxes to the ceiling, nerves. The girl's nose bled again at breakfast and stopped as quickly as it started. A week later, his wife woke with a headache that gripped behind her eyes and wouldn't lift. He felt it too, arriving after the commute, a slow press around his skull as the windows sealed and the house settled. Their toddler coughed in her sleep. The air felt warm and dry, then strangely heavy, as if the place itself were breathing out against them. He had hired a firm selling the future, energy-efficient construction, a shell so tight the winter wind could only drum its fingers on the siding. Laminated plywood bound with adhesives, vinyl flooring, wallpaper that promised no peeling, and finish varnish with a sweet, new car smell. He decided that scent meant quality. He didn't know it meant the house was exhaling the chemistry that made it look perfect. By March, his wife's headaches had become deep fatigue. She stopped lingering at the dining table because her throat burned there. The toddler developed a rash where her pajamas touched her skin. The older child started to hate bedtime. She said her room smelled bitter. He checked the ducts, cleaned the filter, and reminded the children to keep their windows closed to preserve the balanced airflow. Airtightness was the point. "Don't fight the system," he said. They brought in a new sofa and unboxed a plastic playset that held its shape thanks to softeners embedded in the plastic. When the sofa cushions sank with the perfect amount of give, the living room picked up another odor, sharper than the others, sharp enough to sting the sinuses. They cleaned, blamed a forgotten fruit peel, blamed the rainy spring. He stopped inviting friends. On a Wednesday in April, their daughter fainted after standing from her desk. At the clinic, the physician asked about stress, diet, and sleep. He shook his head and said no. The physician recommended hydration and fresh air. He went home and checked the window seals again. He began to wake at 3, tasting metal. Symptoms were worse at night and eased when he left for work. His wife got relief by taking the children to her mother's, then returning at dusk because dinner and baths still belonged there. When he stepped through the door at 7, their eyes looked dull. He blamed long days, then crouched by a baseboard and caught a whiff of glue. He started keeping notes. On May 18th, a humid evening stuck to the city like a film. The toddler began vomiting without fever. He carried her to the car, then stopped and called an emergency line. They asked about gas appliances and solvents. Everything was new and fluid, he said. Only old paste and paint. New furnishings, a sofa, a toy set, fresh shelves. "Bring her in," they said. A pediatrician added one more question. What year was the house built, and what materials? When he said 1995 and listed plywood, adhesives, vinyl, paint, and wallpaper, she nodded. "You may be dealing with a sick house," she said. She wrote a referral to an environmental health unit. He wanted a problem he could fix with a wrench, but it was air. Inspectors arrived with pumps, glass tubes, and color-changing badges. They placed samplers above the toddler's crib and by the dining table where his wife's throat burned. They asked him not to open windows for 24 hours to capture typical conditions. The next day, they returned and sealed the samples. "We'll have numbers by Friday," one said. He booked a hotel and went back alone to meet them. They laid their findings on the counter. Formaldehyde was above the recommended guideline. Toluene and xylene, common solvents in adhesives and finishes, were present. The bedroom where his daughter hated to sleep showed the highest formaldehyde level, likely from built-in storage still off-gassing. The living room carried elevated readings from the new sofa and varnish. Ventilation was undersized for a house this tight. The language was clinical, but the meaning was simple. The air inside was hurting his family. Immediate steps, they said. Remove or isolate new furnishings. Run ventilation continuously and increase airflow. Open windows whenever possible. If symptoms eased outside, stay elsewhere until levels fell. He nodded and watched rain travel down the sealed panes. He had paid to keep the weather out. Now the weather was the cure he had tried to exclude. They moved in with his mother-in-law and returned by day to strip the house. The sofa went to storage. The plastic play set went back in its box. The builder sent a foreman who mentioned a new labeling system for low-emission materials appearing in catalogs. The foreman said they had built what was ordered, a sealed box with standard products. No one had accounted for keeping everything in. They cut up vinyl in the toddler's room and found the smell strongest where adhesive had pooled. They stripped wallpaper in the older child's room. The backing glue released a bitter sting that made their eyes water. They ran window fans, set bowls of activated carbon on shelves, and left the sashes tilted even in rain. He learned how long rooms took to clear after a day shut tight, and the hour headaches returned if he forgot to crack a window. 3 weeks later, the inspectors returned. Levels had fallen. The rash faded after a week away. The older child slept without complaining that the air tasted sour. His wife's headaches returned only when she stayed too long inside cleaning. Formaldehyde remained detectable, but under the guideline. Solvents slid toward background levels. The team stressed that the problem wasn't one villain, but many small exposures multiplied by a house that wouldn't let them go. He hired a contractor to install a balanced ventilation system with the capacity the original build lacked. They cut discrete grills and mounted a unit with an outdoor intake that filtered particulates and diluted whatever still seeped from the walls. He replaced shelving with low-emission alternatives and the crib mattress with one that didn't reek when unwrapped. He began to measure not just temperature but flow, learning a new language because the old one had failed him. In autumn, they moved back. The walls and roofline were the same, but the idea of the house had changed. He still liked the quiet, but never closed a window without thinking. He could tell when the ventilator was running by the slight sway of a curtain. He put away the pride of that first night and replaced it with vigilance. It wasn't fear, it was respect for something unseen that had proven it could harm. When articles began to mention indoor air guidelines and material ratings, he recognized the terms. Builders adopted better adhesives and lower emission plywood. Codes started to require mechanical ventilation in homes built as tight as designers had always wanted. Neighbors joked about the smell of new house, and he did not laugh. He remembered the pillowcase from the first night. He kept the inspector's report in a folder with the numbers highlighted and a note: open windows after deliveries. On winter nights he paused to hear the ventilator's soft whir, then looked in at his children sleeping easily, faces turned toward the cooler air from the grill. There was no smoke and no visible leak, only a lesson written in invisible lines through a home he had tried to make perfect and, after surviving it, just wanted to keep safe. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.